Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting us to talk, and thanks for organising this really important, significant event. I'm sorry Joe had to leave, and sorry for the fire alarm, but at least now we know where the fire exits are, right? Yeah. Okay, so what I want to talk about is the sort of levels of housing violence, and just do a bit of kind of comparing and contrasting, or rather situating what happened at Grenfell Tower on the map of housing violence. Over the last few years now, Dave White and I have been working through ideas of the violence of austerity, and this was all based on the rising levels of suicide, the unravelling of benefit-related suicides, increasing deaths in the NHS, as well as the rise in evictions and levels of geographical displacement happening in the housing sector. So in the wake of austerity, we really started to want to talk about and think about austerity not only as a fiscal policy that exacerbates, increases inequality, but also as a violent economic policy that has direct, violent effects on those most affected and targeted by the policy. It's an important point. Austerity policy by design is targeted. So what happened at Grenfell Tower is by far the most naked form of austerity violence. But since as shocking and as terrifying as Grenfell Tower was, as the fire was, we can really see it, and certainly I can map it on a scale of more general systemic violence that has happened, particularly in London, but also in the UK since 2010. Grenfell Tower is part of systemic form of violence caused to tenants in London, and Joe was starting to highlight that. So I'd just like to continue and pick up on some of those discussions that he was highlighting. There's been a level of routine and everyday housing violence happening here in London and elsewhere in the UK since 2010. It was happening also under the Labour government at the later part of 2000, certainly under regeneration projects, but this housing violence really amplified under austerity measures that came into effect in 2010. Since the onset of austerity measures in 2010, the state has eroded and dismantled what little housing security and housing protection that we had. And in addition to this dismantling of housing protection and security that we had, we've also seen a relentless level of land grabbing, where financiers and private property investors have seduced, and we're seeing this in Haringey right now, have seduced local councils and social housing conglomerates into selling their land to free up the market value and to make a very significant and large profit. And altogether, these processes, the sort of dismantling of housing protection and then the land grabbing, these processes are having quite significant and violent physical and psychological harms for those tenants who are most affected. When the deadly welfare reforms came into effect, I call them deadly because we've seen a number of suicides since they've come into effect. We saw the bedroom tax, benefit caps and changes to local housing allowance, which massively reduced how much people can actually afford, the extent to which people can afford properties to rent in London and elsewhere. We also saw under the shared accommodation rates, overnight we saw 90,000 more people limited to shared accommodation rates. That's multiple occupancy accommodation. In the beginning, and to assuage public concern and public anxiety and anger, I don't know if you remember this person, Ian Duncan Smith, he quietly left. He said, come on, it's not as though we're going to go into your homes and physically remove you from your homes, but they did. And in 2010, Boris Johnson laughably tried to oppose the austerity measures and said, and I quote, "On my watch, you are not going to see thousands of families being evicted from the place they have been living and where they have put down their roots." But Boris Johnson did the exact opposite. Rather than defend the people in London when the austerity measures come into place, as he said he would, which is, although it's laughable, he authorised the social cleansing of several London boroughs and allowed authorities to send an army of agents and an army of enforcement officers to forcibly remove people from their homes for not paying their rent, or authorise property developers to come in and just simply move people from social housing estates for those property developers to free up the value of the land. Since the austerity measures came in, almost overnight, London has turned into an eviction hotspot. If you look at that, Shelter has a really interesting map of the eviction hotspots in the UK. London is the main eviction hotspot, where people are violently, forcibly evicted from their homes on a day-to-day basis. In 2016, we saw 170 people evicted per day. This is mainly in the rented sector, social housing, council housing and private rented sector. The last time we saw this scale of eviction was before municipal housing came into effect. The last time we saw this level of eviction was in the early 1900s. So we've gone right back. In terms of progress, we haven't progressed at all in terms of housing protection and housing security. And we saw this form of violence most visibly in the Sweets Way estate. I don't know if anybody here from London remembers the Sweets Way estate. When in 2014 to 2015, Guy Hans, property developer and owner of the social housing conglomerate Annington Homes, decided to demolish the entire Sweets Way estate, evict 140 families, and send them out of the area in order to redevelop the land to make it more profitable, to design more profitable property. This culminated in the forceful removal of 140 people. Some moved voluntarily, and I use that loosely because it's still forced, but it's not documented. Some moved voluntarily, but it culminated in the forceful removal of a disabled tenant, Mustafa, as well as the campaigners who were there to help and support Mustafa. What happened was Barnet Council not only sent in the police, but they also sent in the High Court Enforcement Officers. For anybody who doesn't know, High Court Enforcement Office is a private company that's contracted out by the government to actually get rid of squatters, to evict families from their homes. And like most debt collection and enforcement companies, since 2010, the profits of these organisations, private organisations, has massively increased. Meanwhile, the government turns a blind eye to the violent intimidation and violent harassment of these enforcement companies in order to evict tenants from their home. As Samuel Beckett once said, why send in the murderers when you can send in the bailiffs? So we're seeing this level of violence, we've seen this level of violence occur, and this is just one example that I'm giving you. This is Sweets Way example. And as in the case of Grenfell tenants, you know, Joe mentioned the point about the ongoing violence, not the violence that happened, but the ongoing violence. As in the case of Grenfell tenants, when the tenants from Sweets Way were about to be evicted, Barnet Council came out and said, don't worry, we'll house you in plenty of time, we'll house you before, you know, the bulldozers come in and start, you know, demolishing the estate. But they never. Not only did Barnet Council fail in their duty of care to rehouse the tenants, Barnet Council then claimed that those tenants were intentionally homeless because they failed to take up the first offer of housing. I've worked in homelessness and I know for a fact the first offer of housing is the shittiest offer that you will get, so they're in the right, everybody's in the right to refuse the first offer of housing. People were moved permanently to Birmingham, to Luton, and even where families were moved to London, they were moved so far away that they had to pay extra money to go to their jobs to send their kids to the same school. And this form of geographical displacement is so mainstream and it's so common, routine now in London. One newspaper, The Independent, claimed that from leaked papers claimed that we're seeing 50,000 homeless families in London geographically dispersed and displaced outside of London. Pertinent to the Grenfell inquiry is the case of Titina Nozolomiso from Westminster. She was evicted from her house, and when she went to Westminster City Council to be rehoused, they tried to send her to Milton Keynes. She was evicted because she couldn't afford her rent after the benefit caps come into place. When she refused the first offer, which was in Milton Keynes, the shittiest offer, she went to the appeal court, and one of the three judges at the appeal court, most of you will know now, is Martin Moorbeck. Martin Moorbeck decided that actually the local authority of Westminster was in its full right and entitlement to rehouse Titina in Milton Keynes. Putting this in perspective, Titina has 5 children, she is HIV positive, type 2 diabetes, and they thought that it was perfectly right to send Titina to Milton Keynes. And this is quite significant when we think about the judgment of social justice of a judge leading such an important public inquiry. Generally, people often fail to see the physical and psychological harms of displacement by eviction. The eviction process itself and being purged from one's home is extremely violent and extremely painful, as I'm sure some of you here may have experienced or know people who have experienced it. Studies in other countries show that eviction can induce psychological harm, such as anxiety, depression, and worst case scenarios, suicide. We've seen similar devastating effects. We've seen people committing suicide in Newham Council, people who were evicted in Newham Council. We've seen other people, Lee Robinson, Mark Scott, Richard Sanderson, Francis McCormack, Nigel Firminger in Kilburn in London, all commit suicide when they were evicted or were threatened with eviction. So how do we make sense of these different scales of housing violence, of the routine and everyday violence that we're seeing in London, with the type of violence that the tenants suffered at Grenfell Tower? How do we join up the dots between these types of violence? As shocking as the violence was at Grenfell Tower, the severe neglect, the years of illegal decision making, the disdain for and contempt, as Aditya Chakraborty says, the contempt for the tenants at Grenfell is the same disdain and the same contempt that we've seen the other local authorities display for tenants in other areas, and the examples that I've just highlighted. And we're seeing this continuum of violence. I was just speaking with Joe there. This is like Grenfell didn't happen. We're seeing this continuum of violence now, especially when Haringey Council just announced its development, the Haringey development vehicle, where it's going to sell over £2 billion worth of land to private developers and a private conglomerate. So we have to think about, you know, where and how Grenfell Tower sits within the scale of housing violence that we've seen since austerity came into effect. Thank you.